Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is our final hour. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I don't know about you, but it's gone by awfully fast, almost too fast, and with such incredible wisdom being shared. I've learned so much myself, so I'm sure that all of you have learned some things as well, and it's not over yet. So this is our final hour, our final topic, and the topic is leadership. We'll bring a number of these things that were talked about in the first 3 hours, bring them together with our final panel. And that panel includes Steve Farber, who I've asked to come back for this hour, along with Pierre Quinn and Frank DeAngelis. And they'll be joined by Tim Dumas. Tim is a leadership coach and speaker. He brings a very energetic approach to coaching and focuses on challenging organizations to lead. He says organizations must lead magnanimously by loving unconditionally and dreaming. I love that last phrase as he talks about it. So welcome, my panel, our final panel. What an impressive group this is. My goodness gracious. And we're now, it's an international panel. I want to point out for the audience, we brought a Canadian leader into our conversation. I will translate for him if his Canadian accent gets a little bit too strong. And Steve, I shouldn't have said that, right, Steve? I shouldn't have said that? No. Now Steve is giving me that look. He said, Dennis, you're off the rails. You're obviously off the rails. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here. All right. So let's get right into these questions. How do leaders motivate and inspire those they lead to practice love, to practice inclusion, to practice social justice? Let's start with Mr. Farber.
Well, thanks for having me back. I've been listening in on the conversation for the last few hours. It's been phenomenal. So thank you, everybody, for making such a great contribution. Well, I think the question of motivation is a great one because there are people that say you can't motivate others. People have to motivate themselves, and you just have to create the right environment and the right conditions for them to do that. And I think there's some truth in that. But when you go to that question first as a leader, what do I got to do to motivate these people? We're missing a really important first step, which is, who are these people? So in line with all the conversations we've been having here today around inclusion and love, and this has been a recurring theme, we have to get to know people. And the same is true for leaders. So here's a good place, I think, for people to start, which is just to ask yourself, if you look at the people on your team, the people that you are ostensibly responsible for motivating and inspiring, just ask yourself, how well do you know them? And one way to answer that question is to take what I like to call a story inventory, which is just think about each person individually and just make a list, take some notes as to the stories that you know about that person and their lives. And what you're going to find is that you either know stories or you don't. And there are some people where you realize, like, I've been working with this person for 10 years. I don't have a freaking clue if they're even married or if they have a pet at home. So we have to start to get to know people. And the more we know them, the more we learn about their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their values. And the more we know that, the more we can speak to those things and help them to achieve those things. There's nothing more motivating than being seen and being known and being heard and living and working in an environment that's conducive to our own growth as human beings.
Okay. Good opening answer. I was expecting you to talk a little longer, but that's okay. We'll come back to you. Well, Tim Dumas, our Canadian friend.
Well, thanks, Dennis. Thanks for adding in the Canadian content today. Just really quickly, though, I got a text just before we started from a woman who's on this conversation, and she said, "Hey, I thought Dennis was just funny. He's actually pretty good." So at least there's one person, Dennis, that thinks that you're funny. I love what Steve talked about connection, because I think about what my first day as a leader, and I went in there. I thought I was going to bedazzle people with this amazing Vince Lombardi speech to lead them to the promised land. And guess what happened, Dennis? They looked me in the eye, they dropped their mouth, and they said, "Why? Why should I follow this guy? I don't even know this guy. He showed up today as our new manager, as our new leader in this business. Why should I do it? What I didn't realize at the time is I didn't understand the art of connection, as Steve was talking about. And for me, leading people really comes down to four things. It's number one, bringing the energy. There's two types of people, and we all know them. The people that bring energy to the room and the people that suck the living energy out of it. And we've all been in meetings with both, and it's certainly the latter. And these people who I'm on the call with today, they're certainly some of the ones who've brought energy into the rooms that I've been in before. And you know what happens, Dennis, when we bring energy to the room? It makes it fun. Yes, we can have fun at work. We're allowed to. Think about the greatest organizations you've been a part of. It could be a team, could be anything. We always do better work when we have fun. The third thing as far as leadership and as far as bringing that to team is believing in someone. Can you think of one time in your life when somebody actually believed in you, maybe before you actually deserved it? Dennis, you and I know a wonderful leader. Her name's Nancy McKay, and I work with her in a company called McKay CEO Forums. We do peer group leadership. And she said to me when I started in McKay, she said, Tim, I'm so pumped for you to be here. You're going to be amazing. This is good. I'm so excited. And I looked around, I go, Nancy, do you know something that I don't? Because I don't see that. But guess what happened? Every day since then, I've tried to prove Nancy right, and I've done the things to prove her right because she believed in me, even if I maybe didn't deserve it at the time. And lastly, Dennis, do you know what happens when people believe in us? We dream. When we ask them the question of, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you achieve both personally and professionally as leaders? That allows us the carte blanche to dream and to become better people. And that's the whole key to leadership, is striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. And we can do that through those questions.
Good. Thanks, Tim. That was awesome. Frank DeAngelis.
You know, I'm coming from this standpoint and just working with all, and you've all had influences on my life, and Steve, your books and things, and allowing to do work with you. But to me, it's all about relationships. And I used to tell our teachers and faculty members with the kids, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's so relevant. And I'm going to build upon something Steve talked about finding out about people. I used to drive my staff members crazy because they'd walk by my office and they said, Frank, you're never in your office. And there was a reason for that. I wanted to be in the classroom with the kids. I wanted to be with the food service people, finding out about them. And an activity when I first became principal is it was right before the holiday season, and I had 150 staff members, and I personalized holiday cards for every staff member. But in order to personalize them, I had to find out about them. And I would write things, you know, I just heard your dad was in the hospital with the heart. I hope he's doing well if you need anything. Or Mary, I heard you became a grandmother for the first time. And the first time I did it, people were comparing cards to see if I was writing the same thing. But when they realized I took the time to find out about them, I'd walk into their offices and they would be there. They'd be on the bulletin board. And when I retired, they invited me back to the first graduation after my retirement, and some staff member came up and said, Frank, you know what we miss about you? And I'm thinking my motivational speeches, you know, my leadership. They said, those cards you gave us. It's the little things that make a big difference. And probably the best compliment that I received when I retired after 35 years at Columbine and 18 years as a principal, they came up to me and they said, you never became one of them. You were always one of us. And we knew you had our back and we had yours. And that was important in leadership.
Terrific. Terrific. Pierre.
All of us on this panel have served as keynote speakers, right? And it's funny from a keynote speaking perspective that sometimes as a speaker, there's a temptation to think a little bit more of yourself than you should. You know, when you wrestle with the question of how do leaders motivate and inspire those they lead to practice these things, I think it's recognizing that it's our responsibility to create and foster environments for motivation and inspiration to happen. Go back to being a keynote speaker. What makes it work really well, and I know all five of us know this, what makes it work really well is when it's a great venue when there's great food, when there's a great stage, when people are having a great experience, when there's, great coffee and water and snacks, that when people are connecting with their friends, they got a few days out of the office, so that when you come on as a keynote speaker, opening, closing, or somewhere plenary in the middle, you don't always even have to hit a home run. And we've been there before where we've doubled, singled or doubled, and everyone was like, this was just the most amazing, inspirational thing that happened to me. And the truth is, it's because the environment was set up for that.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes as leaders, we try to produce a lot of heavy lifting because we haven't created the environments. And what is it like, depending on what our organization looks and feels like? What would it be like to create an environment for motivation and inspiration to happen on a consistent basis, and me not always having to give a keynote speech to make it happen?
I love that way of talking about it. I think that's brilliant. Frank.
If I could build on that just for a second, what Pierre and Frank said, the environment is actually less challenging to set up than you would think, because unfortunately people's expectations are so low. And so, Frank, you said when you wrote those cards for people, the first thing they did was they started comparing them to see if you'd written the same thing to everybody, right? Because people don't write personal notes.
Wow.
So it's that kind of, that's what I mean by the expectations are kind of low, because it's unusual to find a leader who really genuinely, authentically cares enough about us to learn about us and to try to create an environment that we love being a part of. So we don't have to be, we don't have to re-engineer everything and reinvent everything. It's the small gestures. It's that, as Pierre said, it's the analogy, from a speaking engagement and having the right food and snacks and giving people a chance to talk to each other. Not much different at work. It's having the right physical environment and encouraging people to get to know each other. Some of those things apply, but they're really simple. And the contrast, unfortunately, in the grand scheme of things, is so great between what people expect and just those personal touches, that a little goes a very long way, as long as it's sincere.
Yeah. So we talked about love, we talked about inclusion, we talked about social justice. All of you made really excellent comments about leadership in an overall sense. Take a moment and just reflect on where we are right now, this moment in time. It's February 15th, 2022. We are still under the cloud of a thing called a pandemic, and it continues to affect us. Some people think it's real, some people think it's not. It doesn't really matter. It's affecting everybody, whether you thought it's real or not. So as a leader, with this notion of the relationship of this point in time to those three elements that we've had long discussions about, what is it about this point in time that there may be something different or additional that you need to do in order to help the people that you lead? I'm defining the audience, the people that you lead, get to the other side of this, wherever that side is, and we don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I hear the phrase, I'm curious if you guys have heard this as well. I hear the phrase now more than ever, now more than ever. It's now more than ever, because of the challenge that's been thrust on us by the pandemic, because of the fact that we're separated, most of us, where we used to work together every day, because of now more than ever, relationships are important. Now more than ever, support is important. Now more than ever, love is important. Now more than ever, connection is important. Now, of course, we listen to this, and I'll speak for myself. I listen to it and I think, that's always been important. It's not like suddenly it's important where it wasn't before. It's just that the current circumstances has brought these things into sharper focus for all of us. So I think that's a good thing, because these are not solutions strictly to an unusual circumstance. These are all things that we all need every day. But I think for us and again, speaking to business people in particular, when you look at a challenge like social justice, we tend to go right to the macro. We tend to go to social justice in our country and our world, and those are really important questions. I think our opportunity as business people, because we're working day to day in a smaller context, no matter how big your business is, it's still in a smaller context than the so-called the whole wide world, right? So I believe that our opportunity is to create a model where we work, where we live, a microcosm of what's possible in the world. If we can set an example as business people that we can get together as human beings from very different backgrounds and from very different points of view, and align around a common mission and get great things done for our customers and for ourselves, what we're doing is we're setting an example to the rest of the world that says this is possible. Because we lose hope when we begin to think that it's just never going to happen on the broader scale. It's just impossible. And we can show an example in a smaller context of what we can do together. And I think that's going to make a difference. It all adds up, which gives all of us an opportunity through the small W world that we have influence over every day to, for it to add up and have an impact on these, the so-called capital W world.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, if I could pull on that thread just a little bit more, my career has been interesting. Started off teaching college freshmen communication courses, that spent some time in fundraising, local church pastor for 7 years. And then, for 7 years, been in this world of executive coaching, leadership development, workshops, and all of that. And just one of the lessons that I've learned about leadership over the years is, in spite of what's going on with a larger organization, leadership for me always grew, coming back to what Steve said, in the micro moments. So my leadership grew not when I was teaching my class, but when it was those, hey, Professor Quinn, can I talk to you for a few moments after class? It was those moments on top of each other where, and Dennis, you mentioned, like, globally, right? We're dealing with discomfort and all of these issues and a health crisis from different perspectives. What the people need from leadership, yes, you can't be invisible, and yes, you need those inspirational moments. But for a lot of us, it comes down to, how are we responding when an individual is having a crisis of uncertainty? I don't know what's going on with my job. I'm worried about my family. I'm concerned about the direction of the organization. I'm concerned about my team. And as a leader in those moments, Predictive Index said in 2021, one of the number one reasons why people were quitting their jobs was due to a lack of confidence in the person they were directly reporting to. So how can we, when people are having, we got big global widespread challenges, but when people are having those individualized crisis moments, how can I step in with support, with clarity, with confidence, with assurance, and not from a Candyland optimism, but from a wholehearted optimism perspective, that as a leader, I'll support you in every way so that we get through this. And I think more than ever, Steve, more than ever, that's one of the things that we really need to see from leadership.
Yeah. It's actually now more than ever, just to be, right on. And I noticed I didn't use that when I opened up and asked a question, because I knew that if I did, I would have gotten in trouble. Tim.
Yeah, well, Dennis, we're kind of dancing around the Great Resignation, right? We've been hearing about this in the media for almost the past year now, where over and over again, more and more people are quitting their jobs, right? The interesting thing is, when we look at engagement in organizations, it's not that much worse than it was prior to the pandemic. People are just now empowered to leave their jobs, right? So what do we need to do? We need to support them to be engaged. And how do we do that? It really comes down to the simple thing of just being there, right? You know, Pierre and Steve just talked about it. You know, when I first started being a manager in retail, I talked to some experts and they said, Tim, how often are you with your people? And I would tell them how often I was there. And they said, great. Whatever it is, I don't really care how often that is, double it, because it's always more than you think you need to be there. In your office, you're not going to help lead people in your office, and it's asking them questions. Sometimes we forget some of the most simple questions. Number one, how can I support you to be the best version of yourself, both personally and professionally? When we ask that question personally, some people look at me. When I asked that, they looked at me. They thought I was crazy. They're like, hey, this is work. Why are you asking me about how I can be great personally? And really, Dennis, it comes down to one thing. It comes down to when we support people to be great personally, funny thing happens. They start to become great professionally. When we start to help them achieve their personal goals and dreams, guess what happens? They come to work. They're like, hey, how can I help the organization to achieve its goals and dreams? When we start putting those things together, that's what leadership really is. When we put our goals and dreams together, that's when leadership really becomes golden. Because if we just get into the workplace and we talk about profit and we talk about some of the company goals, that's just like what John Wooden talked about. If he just came into the first practice and said, great, our goal is just to make that scoreboard say more points than the other team. The team looks at him and says, John, how? So how did John Wooden start? He started by teaching them to tie their shoes, and they continued to work their way up. And what was the product? The scoreboard took care of itself.
Good job. Frank.
That's good.
I'm going to come from the school standpoint that really ties into these great colleagues that I'm working with right now. Is one of the worst days of my life, obviously, was April 20th, 1999. And I see a lot of similarities of what we're going through right now. And I can remember going back to school, and the kids had to learn math and science and things of that nature. And I knew that was important, but more importantly was meeting the social emotional needs of the students. You know, if kids are hungry or they don't feel safe or they're depressed, I don't care what type of pedagogy you're using or curriculum, you're not going to do it. And I see the same thing happening right now when I'm working with educators around the country. They said, Frank, what do we need to do? You need to train the teachers on what they need to do when these kids walk into their classroom, because they're not the same as what they were prior to the pandemic. And I think that's so important, that teaching that. And then something else that you also talked about, and I learned this, we could all experience the same event, but how we deal with it differently. And there were people back then, just like after Columbine, just like today, some people are going to say, we need to talk about it. We need to do more Zoom. We need to talk. We need to debrief. Others are saying, as soon as I get back to doing what I was doing prior to this pandemic hitting, that's going to help me and some people in between. And that's where you find it's about relationships, and finding out how are you going to meet the needs of all people, doing the best you can. It's that communication piece and caring piece and finding out about others.
Yeah, well said. I want to pick up on one of the things that I talk about a lot, and Frank, you've said it twice now, and that is about relationships. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book I wrote, which is the name of the summit, coincidentally, book titled garnered from the wisdom of Steve Farber, who gave me the title for that book. I talk in that book about people's qualities and how important those qualities are to do something which steel does for a building, which is make it something that lasts for a long time. And that soft skills, the qualities of people, are what gives you the opportunity to have long-lasting relationships and success, and also happiness can be derived from that. But it is all about who you are, how you are, and a focus on building relationships. And leaders don't talk about leadership. They lead. They lead with words. They lead with actions. But all those words and actions are promoted by the environment that they do the talking and the acting in. and their constant encouragement for people to realize that this is a better way. And we'll have greater success if we do this, or if we behave in this way, by valuing people individually, valuing their qualities, and building relationships. Because again, any business enterprise, for profit or otherwise, any kind of an endeavor has a bottom line of some sort. So if you're in business, as my friend Steve Farber would say, I'm a business guy. So it is about the bottom line. But if you focus on the bottom line only, then that bottom line is likely to be smaller, if existent at all. But if you focus on the relationships with the people that help to produce the top line, which is income to a business, then you have an opportunity to have some greater success. It isn't about the bottom line. It's about the relationships. And the ones that, when I talk to contractors, I ask them, raise your hand, tell me how many of your company's been doing business with some folks for 10, 15, or 20 years. And a lot of hands go up. And I said, what was important about those companies you did business with? Well, they did business with us when nobody else was getting business. We got jobs when nobody else was getting jobs. And then they didn't get jobs because they were the lowest price. They didn't get jobs because they were non-union or union. They got jobs because of the relationships they had. That's where the ball game is, and that's where all four of you great leaders understand so well we need to operate. Tim's smiling. I look at Tim.
Well, Dennis, you're talking about people over profits, right?
Yes.
People always ask the question, and often in sessions, they ask me, Tim, so what's more important, people or profits? And given what I speak about, they always think I'm going to say people. And it's kind of a trick question, because my answer is it doesn't matter. Because if people are more important than profits, you're going to put people first. If profits are more important than people, you better as heck put people first, or else you're not going to get profits. So no matter what the answer is, it's always the people. So it doesn't really matter. And that's what you're saying.
That's what I said.
To build on that a little bit, even the question belies the deep conditioning we have in our attitude towards people and in business. And that is, why do we think of it as a choice between those two things? It's not an either or scenario. It's a both and scenario. As you said, Dennis, I refer to I'm a business guy. I say that a lot. I'm a business guy, which means, you don't have a business unless you have a healthy bottom line and good return to show your shareholders, et cetera. How do you get there is, as Tim was saying, by putting the people at the top of your list, but it's not a choice between the two. It's about creating a great environment and having a competitive business and having an impact on the world all at the same time. That's what we should be striving towards. And just the fact that we think of, I like the version of that question that I get asked a lot is, what's more important, love or business, love or profit? The answer is yes. It's all, the question is flawed. The question we're trying to ask is, what's the best way to create a profitable company? And if I say, is that love or profits, there's an assumption that love gets in the way of that versus love supports that. It's just kind of the way we've been conditioned. And it's time to turn that on its head. And that's going to have an impact on every aspect of our society, not just the way we conduct business.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I got another question. What's the greatest challenge or the biggest opportunity for leaders to make the world a better place? It's an easy question. Kind of a softball kind of question. Who's up first? Who's up to bat first on that question?
Well, Dennis, sometimes I think to make the world a better place, sometimes we forget about what the actual question could be to make the world a better place. Stephen Covey talks a lot about begin with the end in mind. And often we don't ask ourselves as a business, what is our ultimate goal? And often we don't ask ourselves as people, what's our ultimate goal? So when we change that question to be this, when you're no longer on this earth, what are the 10 things you want people to say about you at your eulogy? And what do you want people to write about you on your tombstone? And live your life that way. And live your life in business that way. I've still not met anyone that said, I wanted to say was amazing at getting the best operating profit that we've ever had. Nobody's ever said that, but people start to say about impacted people, left a legacy, made the business a better place, impacted customers in a better way. And sometimes we forget about what the question is. And before we even start living it, if we remember that question, that's a way we can start living and impact the world in our business and in our lives.
It's funny. You reminded me of my one of my mentors, Tom Peters, used to have this. He used to riff on that. He said, "Yeah, I want to say on my tombstone, the inscription is he made budget."
Yeah, just to build on that too, Dennis. It's often in business, we forget our employees. We start talking about operating profit and making great profit. But I've never met anyone, even an owner of a business, that's ultimate goal is operating profit. I'm an owner in some businesses, and my goal is not operating profit. It might be what operating profit can do for my family, help take them on a vacation, pay for my kids' college. But we don't ask our employees what they're doing this job for. And they might be doing this job, obviously, to impact other people in their lives. But we forget to ask them, are you doing it to help pay for your kids' college? So how can we make better operating profit together so you can pay for your kids' college? So you can take your kids on that Disney vacation you've always dreamed about. And once we put those things together, we're working on the same team. So many organizations aren't even working on the same team.
Pierre.
I know we have authors on this panel, and I think one of the greatest mistakes that leaders make over their career and even beyond is that we don't write enough things down. We move a lot on personality and charisma and style for some of us as it relates to leading an organization. But what do we do a lot of times when there's a leadership transition? When we lose a great person or the founder or principal leaves the company, a lot of times there's this huge gap because we didn't document enough of the process, we didn't tell enough of the story, and we didn't leave enough tools behind. Some of us do a very good job of reading great leaders. I mean, all four of you have the bookcase behind you with nuggets of insights that you've picked up from leaders over the years. I think we sometimes do a better job at elevating and celebrating the stories of leaders we consider to be influential and dynamic, and not always a good job of, in our context, say the intention is not necessarily to write a New York Times best-selling book. It could end up there. But what if the context is just to document my journey for my company, for my mentees, for who I'm coaching, and for my family, so that when I'm no longer around, there are pieces of the story, especially of success, that they can pick up and continue to run with.
Mm-hmm. That's terrific. Frank, you're going to say something?
Yeah. One of my mentors, and I'm looking at him directly, is Steve. And what he taught me, and he trusted me right before I retired to come out and speak at his Extreme Leadership Conference in Chicago. And I learned so much from him because I wasn't on a speaking tour or things. And I said, and I saw the lineup of speakers, and I said, you got to be kidding me. Why am I here? A charity case. And he said, trust me. And he believed in me, and he gave me that opportunity. And what I learned from Steve is what I hope is a leader, where I'm most proud is when I see people that I mentored being successful. Whether it was a coach, when I saw some of my assistant coaches becoming a head coach, when I saw some of my assistant principals becoming principals, that's the most important thing. And I think a lot of times in leadership, we're afraid to share things because they're saying, oh my gosh, Pierre is going to take this information and he may be greater than me. And we can't have that. It's not about you. If we're really concerned what's going to make this world better, we're going to learn from all of us today and take those skills, because the ultimate goal is what's going to correct some of the topics we talked about today. And it's all working together and sharing and not worrying about who's getting the credit. We're doing it for the worldkind.
Just to build on a couple of things you were saying. First of all, thank you for those gracious words, Frank. That's lovely. And in all fairness, that a lot of that has to do with just your your wonderful modesty. In fact, the last conference, which was right before COVID hit, do you remember? You remember Frank spoke again, and the agenda was right before him. Sandra Joseph, who was the longest running leading lady in Broadway history, played Christine in Phantom of the Opera for 10 years, and her husband Ron Bomer, who was a Phantom. they were on right before Frank, and I remember sitting with you in the back of the room, and you looked at me, you said, what the hell are you doing to me, putting me on after this? And he just was amazing, of course. But anyway, there's a theme that I'm hearing here. It's that desire to raise other people up, as Frank was just talking about, as opposed to protecting your turf. And Pierre, this is a really cool idea of that, documenting what you've done, understanding that your impact is going to go beyond your personal presence there. If you're really a great leader, you're thinking about the future of the organization, which may not include you, but it's still your responsibility. The flip side of that is, and I've seen this happen more times than I care to admit, because it doesn't reflect well on us as business people, is when an organization or a team even accomplishes great things. There's a change in leadership. The new leader comes in, oftentimes from outside the organization, that piece of the organization, and the attitude is, new sheriff in town.
Mhm.
We're going to do things my way. And there's no desire to know what happened before. There's no desire to build on the great work that people have done, because what I want to do is establish myself, which comes from, it's purely ego driven. And I need to prove to these people how great a leader I'm going to be by dismantling everything that's gone before and recreating this place in my own image. And the flip side of that is, and it gets back to your initial, really challenging question, which is, what is the biggest challenge that we have today as leaders, which is, I don't know. There's so many to choose from, but I know that one of them is we are so locked into our own perspectives and points of view that it seems like it's making it harder and harder to learn others. And again, this has been a recurring theme all morning here. So if I'm a new leader, and for those of people who may be listening who are in a new leadership role, I'd give you the same advice that I give anybody who's in that situation, and that is, consider yourself to be, for the first period of time, whatever it might be, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a couple months, be a student. Your job is to learn everything about this place, this history, these people, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, what do they love, what do they not love, and based on that, you could start bringing in some new perspectives. But if you come in from that place of ego that's saying, I need to prove to everybody how great I am, you're dead in the water. And just because people are smiling and nodding at you, that doesn't mean that they're approving of what you're doing. They're smiling and nodding at you. They're smiling and nodding at you because they took another look at the org chart and they figure, I should probably be smiling and nodding right now. And that is not a way to lead an organization based on that kind of fear and concern about one's own safety.
And I think, just to build a little bit upon that, and I mentored the principal that took the place after me, but I was at Columbine for 35 years and people were used to my leadership. And one of the things, he called me up one night and he said, why did I take this job? And I said, what's going on? And they kept saying, well, Frank didn't do it like that. Frank didn't do it like that. And why are you doing it like that? And sometimes I said, you just need to sit back and listen. And as time goes on, you'll be able to instill. But to just come in and say, well, Frank's no, as Steve pointed out, the new sheriff in town, I'm going to do it differently. You don't win leadership in that manner also. So it's, I think, being a listener and learning and building upon the positive and then bringing in your own personality as time goes on.
My simple take on this is that there are things that you do that are about the job of the CEO that's brought in as this new leader. But there's also how you are doing those things. And to me, that's where the impatience comes in. They can come in and say, well, Frank did it. Well, I'm not doing it. Frank did it way. I'm not doing it that way. I've got my own way. That's about the job. The part that separates a great leader from others, including folks that my good friend Mr. Farber refers to as imposters, is that they understand themselves and they recognize that their particular qualities need to be adapted potentially to the environment of the organization they are now leading. Doesn't mean they have to change everybody in the organization, but they have to try to adapt. And they have to give people the time to become accustomed to their way of interacting with people, even their choice of vocabulary, their style of communication, how they use humor, how they use gestures, whatever it may be. They need to recognize that people need to see them leading, not to hear them and not to be given a memo saying this is a new procedure effective tomorrow. They need to see them and hear them leading, and the leader needs to take the time to work through his direct reports or his leadership team and learn about them in terms of their qualities so that they can come to some mutual understanding about, here's the way I operate, here's the way you operate. We can do this now that we understand each other better. And that's the world I live in that Steve knows very much. I talk about soft skills all the time, the qualities of people. I think the soft skills are the difference maker. And they're different for everybody at every level in an organization, and certainly for leaders who want to be remembered as great leaders, because you're not going to remember a person as a great leader because of some technical qualification or some other aspect of job performance. It's going to be their qualities, the way they made people feel, that's going to give them the legacy that will reflect positively on them.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, this is always a messy process. I mean, if we're talking about the context of taking over taking over from a previous leader, because there are different scenarios and some are more urgent than others. If you're in a turnaround situation where the house is burning down, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm suggesting you should go in and talk to everybody that lives in the rooms that are burning, and take a couple of months to find out, well, how did the fire start exactly? You need to get them the hell out of the house.
Now more than ever, Steve. Now more than
right.
ever.
We have a tendency to look for the simple, easy, clean, step-by-step answer for everything, and there are very few of those out there. But even in the most urgent of situations, the way we go about doing it, like you were saying, Dennis, is really critical, and we should always be paying attention to what's the impact of these seemingly drastic decisions that I have to make, and am I communicating in a way that people are really going to understand it? So none of this is formulaic. Nothing we talked about today is just give me step by step 1, 2, 3, and that'll solve everything. We have to be willing to get in there and experiment. And whenever we experiment, by definition, that means sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's why it's called an experiment. And we got to learn from what works, and we have to learn from what doesn't work.
I think one of the things that we often forget when we have these leadership conversations and people who want to aspire to be leaders and do all these programs and even go on this leadership track, that leadership is about people, and people are messy, and people can be difficult. And do you know the messiest, most difficult person that you deal with? The one you see in the mirror every day. Once we start to forget, it starts to fall off the rails. But this is about people and how they feel and what they're going through. And that's not linear at all. As Steve was saying, it's very messy. It's gooey. It's squishy. It's sticky. And by choosing to be a leader, I am choosing. It's not on the job description, but somewhere written in invisible ink, it's you have chosen to step into the icky, messy, squishy confusion of life and be with these people.
Yeah. Well said. Here's our last question. We're getting to the end of our time together. I'm disappointed. I think I just want to extend this thing until for another 4 or 5 hours, because Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm delighted with all of you. So here's the question. How do leaders reach all generations to bring about change? Not just one, all. Tim, let's get the Canadian perspective on this simple little question.
It's such a simple question. Thanks, Dennis, for throwing me the easy one. How do we change all generations? Well,
Reach them. How do you reach all
how to reach all
generations
generations?
to bring about change?
Okay, so one thing is just asking questions, right? Steve, you were mentored by Tom Peters. He talked about management by walking around, right? And sometimes we forget about that. Just asking them, how can I best support you? One of the great mantras that I've utilized in the workplace is on somebody's first day, going up to them right away, and they're usually expecting you as the quote unquote leader in the organization to tell them something about what to do. My favorite line is, "Welcome to the company. Yesterday was the last day you worked for me. Today is the first day that I work for you. And as a leader in the organization, my job is now to work for you. You don't work for me anymore. You work for the customer, and I work for you." And when we change that mantra, it doesn't matter what generation we're in, Dennis, and we start asking those questions and we start asking them how we can support them and help them, that's when things really change, when they realize that that's actually what we're there for. And one thing that, especially younger generations, but generations alike, Dennis, you know what they forget in the workplace? We forget to allow people to fail. We forget to allow people, and I'm not talking about catastrophic failure, burning the building down, but having little small mistakes along the way. We often, as leaders, jump in and say, and what happens when we jump in is we stop the growth. We think about when we learned to ride a bike, how we learned. We learned to ride a bike by falling. We learned to do anything by little microscopic failures. So how can we be there and support them while still allowing them that opportunity to grow? And when we ask people those questions and we show them that we're there, it's intergenerational, Dennis.
Great answer. Who's out? Who else?
I had a real issue. I'm a baby boomer, and people of our age, if we worked, I mean, we were there all day long. And when the younger generation came in, they'd say, "Hey, I'm working smarter, not harder." And there was some real resentment. I mean, at 3 o'clock, and I'm looking at Steve because I listen to his audio tapes every day, and he said, "We got to separate business and professional life. And how do you balance that type of thing?" And I thought about that. And I soon realized that we could be successful as an organization, and we bring our skills into the ultimate goal, being a successful organization. So I had someone to talk about it. You know, what is the difference between generations? And one of the best things that I did is we did peer evaluations or peer observations. And I would decide, I would pair them up with a younger staff member with an older, and they would see, hey, this technology thing kind of works. And the younger ones are saying, oh my gosh, I can learn from some of the more mature people at staff. And they actually, as opposed to being so set in their ways and saying, these young kids, they don't respect me and I proved myself. And the younger ones are saying, your time has passed you by. But once they understood each other and they realized that it's a common goal, it worked out. So.
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story. So I had a manager who was complaining to me about these kids today, and he was describing an interview with somebody who was interviewing to come and join his company, and he said, this kid comes in and he sits down in front of my desk and he folds his arms and he looks at me and he says, "What do you got for me?" This is somebody he's interviewing, and he just couldn't believe the audacity of this punk. That was in 1994. So I think the first thing that we have to do to reach all generations is we got to get beyond these kids today attitude, because every generation has that same attitude about the upcoming generation. Now, what we could do, we could keep the same words and we could say, these kids today, you know, what makes them tick? Because there are differences on a deeper level. We're not so different. You know, we want to make the world a better place. We're wired a little bit different because of the technology that we've been involved in. You know, these kids today, well, they've grown up with, mobile devices. So I think that one of the things that's really going to be important to us, and it builds a little bit on what Tim was saying, just give you just a little different nuance on it. I think the challenge that people who are growing up in this generation, the phone generation, challenge that we have, and not just people growing up in it, but all of us, is we're losing our ability to be present because that thing is always calling to us with texts and messages and bleeps and blurps. So I think, and this is a lecture I've given to my kids who are all adults now, but I've been delivering this lecture for a while. You guys are having trouble staying present because of your protocol around texts. If you can develop the ability to be present, if you can develop the ability to put that stuff away and really focus in on whomever you're with by asking the questions and tuning in and making eye contact and having conversation, you'll have a huge advantage over everybody else in your generation. Because even though we're not as good at being present as we used to be, the way people respond to it will never change. We love people who are present with us.
Yeah.
So whatever generation you're in, be present with the other generation and strive to learn and focus.
Yeah.
And we'll figure it out.
And I could punctuate that by saying you can't build relationships with a mobile phone. So any last thought? Last thought will be Pierre. You have a last thought?
Yeah, there was this piece that was floating around the internet, supposedly from Seneca, the Roman philosopher. And it talks about how young people don't respect their elders. They're always, driven by their fanciful imaginations. They don't commit to work. And people put that up online and say, who do you think wrote this? And somebody would call someone in the 1950s or 60s and they say, no, it was written by Seneca. It's really a Roman philosopher. So even back then, people were wrestling with, Steve, the kids these days. I was having a conversation with my girls a couple of months ago, and we were talking about pop culture and music, and they were like, Dad, you're so old. Oh, this is the music that kids listen to these days. And just on the spur of the moment, I said, let me give you the breakdown on how the music industry works. The stars that you like today, the stars performing and singing the music are in their 20s. The music is written by people in their 30s, produced by people in their 40s. The road manager is in their 50s. The record company executive is in the 60s, and the person who owns the company is in their 70s. That is an intergenerational dynamic that really makes it work.
Fabulous.
And if we learn from the music industry, leverage these intergenerational relationships for total organizational success.
Awesome. That was terrific. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It was an incredible conversation. A lot of wisdom, a lot of good humor, but important messaging. Thank you. Thank you,
Dennis. What a remarkable day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dennis. Such a pleasure.
Everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we've arrived at the end of our time together. Again, I don't know about you, but it seemed like it just flew by, and I hope that means nothing but good things for each and every one of you. I hope that you got as much from these conversations as I did. I want to thank each of my speakers for their incredible contributions to these discussions. I'm very confident that these conversations will find their way into the hearts and minds of others after this event. Thanks in no small part to the incredible thoughtfulness and leadership demonstrated by those speakers. I also want to thank each of one of you in the audience, spending an incredible amount of time today attending this event. I hope you got something very worthwhile from it. The summit was recorded and will be available in the near future for your download and reviewing if you care to, or to share it with others. I hope you'll do so. I want to thank you again for being here today. I wish you all the very, very best. Thank you.